A team of archaeologists in Japan thought they had found a row of multiple swords lined up inside an ancient burial chamber. They were wrong. It was one sword, a single iron blade almost 8 feet long, forged 1,600 years ago, so impossibly massive that trained professionals with decades of experience looked at it and refused to believe what they were seeing. When they finally measured it, the deputy director of one of Japan's most respected archaeological institutes said the metalwork was, and I quote, beyond what we had imagined. They upgraded it immediately to national treasure status, and that sword is just the beginning. Because today we are going through 7 weapons that should not exist, not weapons that are merely impressive. Weapons that made the experts who found them question everything they thought they knew about what ancient people were capable of. And every single one of these weapons has a secret the history books still have not fully explained. Let's start in Japan. January 2023. In the city of Nara, famous today for its free-roaming deer, which will eat your map and walk away without apologizing, archaeologists have been carefully excavating the Tomio Maruyama burial mound, the largest circular kofun in all of Japan. This mound is 109 meters across, roughly the length of a football field, and dates back to the second half of the 4th century AD. That puts us squarely in Japan's kofun period, a fascinating and still partially mysterious era from about 300 to 710 AD that gets its name from exactly these kinds of burial mounds built for the elite. Japan has an estimated 160,000 of these kofun. Most of them have never been opened. Just sit with that number for a second. 160,000 sealed tombs scattered across the Japanese islands, the majority still untouched, still holding whatever was placed inside them over 1,000 years ago. Egypt, by comparison, has roughly 130 surviving pyramids. The scale of what might still be waiting inside Japan's burial mounds is genuinely staggering. The Tomio Maruyama mound had already yielded interesting finds over 5 excavation seasons: copper containers, farming tools, decorated mirrors with animal motifs. But in late 2022, during the 5th season, working in the Tsukuridashi, a squared outcropping on the northeast side of the mound, the team found a grave pit dug into gravel containing a split coffin made of koimaki wood. And inside the clay layer covering the coffin lid, they found 2 objects that nobody was ready for. The first was a dako sword, a type of ceremonial iron sword distinctive for its wavy, snake-like undulating blade. 85 dako swords have been found across Japan. The archaeologists were familiar with the type. What they were not familiar with was a dako sword that measured 2.37 meters long and 6 centimeters wide. That is 7 feet and 9 inches of solid iron, forged and shaped in the late 300s AD. It is more than twice the length of the previous record holder for the longest dako sword, which was found in Hiroshima and measured around 85 centimeters. Twice as long, not 10% longer, not slightly bigger, double. And this was not just the longest dako sword, it was the longest iron sword ever found in East Asia. The blade was hammered and bent in 6 places to create the characteristic serpentine effect. Traces of organic material from the sheath and the grip wrapping were found on the pommel, hilt, and scabbard. Someone made this sword with extraordinary skill and intention. When archaeologist Riku Murase of the Nara Archaeological Research Center first saw the object in the pit, he told journalists he initially believed the team had found multiple swords lined up in a row. That was the only explanation his brain offered, because one sword of that size was simply outside his reference frame. Kosaku Okabayashi, the deputy director of the Nara Prefectural Archaeological Institute of Kashihara, said it plainly. The discoveries indicate that the technology of the Kofun period was beyond what had been imagined, and that both objects were masterpieces in metalwork from the period. The second object was a bronze mirror, but not a normal bronze mirror. Most bronze mirrors found at Japanese archaeological sites are round. This one was shaped like a shield. It measured 64 centimeters tall by 31 centimeters wide and weighed 5.7 kilograms. It was the first of its kind ever discovered in Japan. Both objects were immediately classified as national treasures. So who were these weapons buried for? That question is genuinely unsolved. Archaeologists found the coffin, but no human remains inside it. The bones did not survive 600 years in the soil. What they know is that the person buried here was connected to the ruling imperial Yamato family, but was not royalty themselves. They were likely a powerful supporter of the local rulers, probably involved in military and ritual matters based on the nature of the objects. Their exact identity is unknown and may never be known. What is known is this: they were buried with a sword that no smith was supposed to be able to make yet. A sword that required control of iron at a scale and quality that the official historical record said was not there. The technology of the Kofun period was beyond what we imagined. That sentence, coming from the deputy director of one of Japan's premier archaeological institutions, is remarkable. Now, let us go back much further. About 5,000 years further, in the desert of Upper Egypt, to a ruined city that was already ancient when the pyramids were being built. The city is Hierakonpolis, known in ancient times as Nekhen, and it was the capital of Upper Egypt during a period so early that Egypt as a unified country did not yet exist. We are talking roughly 3,500 to 3,100 BC. In 1897 and 1898, British archaeologists James Quibell and Frederick Green descended on the ruins of this city, excavating the remnants of a temple of Horus. Beneath the temple, they found a large repository of votive objects that had been deposited there over centuries, artifacts spanning from around 3,500 BC all the way to 2,600 BC, offerings left by worshippers across nearly 1,000 years. Among all the objects in that deposit, one stopped everything. A limestone mace head, about 32.5 centimeters tall, weighing 9 kilograms, covered in intricate carved scenes. This was not a weapon meant to hit anything. It was 5 times the size of a functional Egyptian mace. This was a monument in the shape of a weapon, designed to communicate something enormous about the person it represented. The images carved into it are a direct historical document from the edge of prehistory. A large king wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, standing next to a watercourse, holding a hoe. In front of his face, carved next to a rosette symbol of royal power, is a scorpion. You do not need an archaeology degree. That is the Scorpion King, not the CGI version, the real one. His formal designation is Horus Scorpion II, and he ruled Upper Egypt around 3075 to 3050 BC, before the First Dynasty, before Egypt was unified, before the concept of pharaoh as we understand it even existed. There was an earlier Scorpion King before him, Scorpion Opine, who ruled around 3250 BC, but almost nothing is known about that earlier ruler. Scorpion II is the one on the mace head. The scene of the king opening a waterway with a hoe was not just decoration. It commemorated the most important ceremony in the entire history of ancient Egypt, the ritual opening of irrigation dikes after the Nile flood. This ceremony determined whether crops would grow. It began before Egypt was unified. It continued for thousands of years, all the way through Alexander the Great's conquest of Egypt. The scorpion mace head is the oldest surviving physical evidence that this ceremony was performed. It is older than the First Dynasty. It is older than the Narmer palette. It shows us a king performing the foundational ritual of Egyptian civilization at a time when that civilization was barely forming. And it is the only image of the Scorpion King that exists anywhere. No tomb has been confirmed as his, no other portrait, no inscription that carries his full name. This carved limestone object is the only visual proof that he existed. It currently sits in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. Some historians have even suggested, based on similarities with the later Narmer palette, that Scorpion King and Narmer may have been different names for the same person, though that debate is ongoing. What is not debated is this. The mace head connects us to a moment 5,000 years ago when one man was consolidating the power that would become the Egyptian Empire, and he left behind a single stone weapon to tell the story. Fast forward to July 2025. An excavation team from several Azerbaijani institutions, working at the Keshichidagh State Historical and Cultural Reserve on the windswept plains of Karankol in western Azerbaijan, just a few miles from the borders of both Georgia and Armenia, opened a burial mound. From the outside, it was a kurgan, a Central Asian burial mound, roughly 90 feet across and 6.5 feet tall, covered by 14 massive limestone slabs, each weighing approximately 1 ton. 14 one-ton stones arranged as a roof over a single tomb. That is not a casual burial. That is a community spending enormous resources to honor one person. Inside the kurgan was a 3-chambered tomb. One chamber held the burial and weapons. One held 12 inlaid and richly decorated ceramic jugs that had contained cooked animal bones, food for the journey to the afterlife. The third chamber was left completely empty, which researchers say holds symbolic meaning connected to the soul's transition. And in the burial chamber was a skeleton. The skeletal remains indicate this man stood approximately 6 feet 7 inches tall, 2 meters exactly, during his life around 1800 BC at the height of the Middle Bronze Age. At a time when the average human height was around 5 feet 5 or 5 feet 6 at best, this man was over a foot taller than essentially everyone around him. He would have been physically identifiable at distance on any battlefield. He would have been imposing in any room he entered. He would have looked, to people of his time, genuinely different, more than human in scale. And he was buried not beside his weapon but gripping it. His hand still held a 4-pronged bronze spearhead. Not a spear with 1 point, a spear with 4 points, arranged like an expanded trident. A weapon type described by the excavation team as extraordinarily uncommon, not just in Azerbaijan, but across the entire South Caucasus region. This specific weapon form is essentially unique in the archaeological record of the area. Nobody made spears like this, nobody that we have found, and the only person buried with one was a 6'7" Bronze Age warrior whose tomb was covered with 14 one-ton stones. Above the tomb, researchers also found a bull-shaped stone idol and a circular limestone seal. objects suggesting not just military power, but some form of spiritual or administrative authority. The team that uncovered this, led by Dr. Shamil Najafov, officially designated this group of mounds the Keshikchida Kurgans, and stated that the discovery is reshaping what experts know about the Middle Bronze Age in the South Caucasus. No one knows who this man was. No name, no title, no written record of his existence survives from that time and place. But someone built a monument over him with 14 stones, each weighing 1,000 kilograms, filled his afterlife with a feast, and buried him with a weapon that no one else in the region used. Whatever he was in his lifetime, he mattered enormously to the people who knew him. Now come with me to the Great Wall of China, late 2025. Archaeologists working at the Jiangkou section of the wall, a particularly steep and dramatic stretch in the mountains of Huairu district near Beijing, are doing something unusual. They are conducting a proper archaeological excavation of the wall itself, not just restoring it. 3 watchtowers numbered 117, 118, and 119 are being studied alongside their connecting wall sections. What comes out of those walls and towers is extraordinary. Over 300 artifacts, evidence of both the military purpose of the wall and the daily life of the men who served on it. And the centerpiece of it all is a cast iron cannon sealed inside the stone structure for nearly 400 years that nobody knew existed. The cannon is 89.2 centimeters long. It weighs 112.1 kilograms, that is 247 pounds. An inscription on the barrel reads Chongzhen Year 5, which translates to 1632 AD, the final years of the Ming Dynasty. It is the largest cannon ever found at any section of the Jiangkou Great Wall and was announced at a Beijing archaeology press conference in December 2025 by Shang Heng, Associate Research Fellow at the Beijing Institute of Archaeology. The cannon itself is extraordinary enough, but the technological story it tells is what makes it genuinely significant. The design of this cannon is not purely Chinese. It shows clear influences from European artillery, specifically from the Hongyi cannon, a style of European design heavy artillery that was introduced into China during the late Ming period. Researchers said its design shows that the Jiangkou section of the wall was functioning as a heavily armed frontier defense system, not just a symbolic barrier. And the technological crossover is real. Chinese weapon makers in the 1600s were actively studying European cannon design, incorporating external innovations while maintaining Chinese manufacturing traditions. A Chinese cannon built in 1632, influenced by European artillery, sealed inside a section of the Great Wall for 400 years, and found perfectly preserved. Shang Heng said the inscription provides crucial new evidence for studying firearms, manufacturing, and historical military technology exchange during the Ming period. The human story inside those walls is just as remarkable. In Watchtower 118, archaeologists uncovered the largest heated brick bed, known as a kang, ever discovered at Jiangkou. The soldiers posted on this section of the Great Wall were sleeping on heated brick platforms because the mountain climate was so cold. Food remains and animal bones with butchery marks showed that meals were being prepared inside the garrison. Charred plant remains and crop traces are now being analyzed to reconstruct what the soldiers ate. And then there was a brick, one brick found in the wall, that had words scratched into it by the person who made it. The inscription translates as, "Nothing but alcohol or worry. 3 years of toil turned my hair white." A man who built part of the Great Wall sometime in the Ming Dynasty, 400 or 500 years ago, scratched his exhaustion and his sadness into the brick he was working on, sealed it into the wall, and it has just now come out again for the first time. These artifacts, taken together, do not just show a wall, they show the full life of the people who built and defended it, including a weapon so advanced for its context that its discovery prompted immediate calls for further study of Ming-era military technology. Back to Scandinavia. The year is 950 AD. Somewhere in the flat farmlands of what is now southwestern Denmark, near a town called Horup, a Viking community is conducting a burial. They are building something unusual, a structure called a dødehus, a death house, a rectangular wooden palisade roughly 13 feet wide and 43 feet long, sealed and dedicated entirely to the dead. It is the first of its kind ever found in Denmark. Inside, they are burying 2 people, a man and a woman, in separate graves, but within the same sacred structure. The woman is placed inside a wooden wagon, a burial reserved in Viking tradition for women of noble birth. Her clothing was woven with gold and silver threads. A pair of keys was placed in her grave, a symbol of authority and status for women not just in the Viking Age, but throughout medieval Europe, a tradition that researchers believe may stretch back to the Bronze Age. One of those keys fit the lock of a small wooden casket buried beside her, whose wood has long since decayed. Who was this woman? We do not know. Only a single strand of black hair survived in her clothing after more than 1,000 years in the soil, and future DNA analysis may one day tell us more. The man was buried with a single object. No jewelry, no coins, no decorative garments, just one item. His axe. This was not a decorated ceremonial object. It had no inscriptions, no precious metal inlay, no ritual markings of any kind. It came straight out of the forge and into the hands of its owner. Archaeologist Kirsten Nelleman Nielsen of the Silkeborg Museum, who led the excavations, told Live Science that Viking axes like this one were the most feared weapons of the Viking Age. When raiding parties came ashore in Britain, Russia, France, and beyond, the sight of Vikings raising their axes as they stepped off the longships was enough to empty a village. This particular axe is significantly larger and heavier than others of its type. It is one of the largest Dane axes ever found. It required both hands to wield. It would have had a long handle. And the man buried with it was buried with nothing else. No indication of wealth, no display of rank through possessions, just the identity he chose. He was a warrior. His axe was enough. Why these two people were buried together in a sealed death house when they had separate graves is a mystery that Nielsen openly acknowledges has no definitive answer. They may have been husband and wife. They may have been siblings, perhaps a local chieftain and a village matriarch who exercised their power together without being romantically involved. They may have been married, but simply preferred their own private grave space. The death house built around them, the resources devoted to their joint burial, the scale of the structure, all of it says that the community recognized them as a unit, a power couple. Together in death, as they had been in life, separated by only a few feet of soil and a shared wooden wall, holding their authority over the territory and the objects they took with them into whatever came next. Let's end in Iran, northwestern Iran specifically. In the summer of 1958, a young archaeologist named Robert Dyson Jr. led a team from the Penn Museum to a site called Hassanlu, where aerial surveys had suggested cultural remains just below the surface. What they found was not a ruin. It was a frozen moment. Hassanlu was an Iron Age city, occupied around 1200 BC, that had been burned to the ground in a single catastrophic event. The attackers, whoever they were, killed everyone, burned everything, and then left without looting. They did not take the gold. They did not sift through the ashes. They just burned and walked away. The result was that the entire city, its elite residences, temples, citadel, streets, and all the objects inside them, was sealed under a layer of ash and collapsed mud brick that preserved it almost perfectly for 3,000 years. Archaeologists have compared Hassanlu to Pompeii for the completeness of its preservation. Heaps of gold, silver, and ivory scattered in the rubble. More than 250 skeletons found in clusters, many crushed by falling masonry, many showing evidence of having been cut down in a bloodbath. In front of the doors of the main temple, more than 50 skeletons lying scattered around the entrance, defenders who rushed to save their sanctuary and were overwhelmed. But what made Hassanlu extraordinary for the history of weapons was what those defenders were carrying. The city was home to about 70 swords, and these swords represented one of the most significant technological leaps in the history of weaponry. The people of Hassanlu were living right at the transition between the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. They were among the very first people anywhere on Earth to figure out how to forge iron blades and then cast bronze handles directly onto them in a single manufacturing process. Separate materials, different melting points, different working properties, fused together into a single seamless weapon. Today, materials engineering students learn the theory behind bonding dissimilar metals. In 2200 BC, the smiths of Hassanlu were doing it by hand, in a fire, by feel. It does not sound dramatic until you understand what it meant for everyone who came after them. A sword with an iron blade holds an edge at a level that bronze simply cannot match. Iron is harder. Bronze is easier to cast, but softer. The combination, iron blade for cutting performance, bronze handle for grip design and casting flexibility, was a weapons revolution. It changed what a sword could do, and it changed warfare going forward in the same way that the rifle changed it much later. The first time bullets met gunpowder, everything was different. The first time iron met a bronze cast handle in the forge at Hassanlu, everything was also different. A fortified city full of the world's most advanced swordsmiths, sitting on top of a technological breakthrough that would change warfare. And it burned anyway. The blades they forged could not save them. The temple they defended collapsed in flames. More than 250 people died. Their killers were never identified. No written record names them. No army claimed the victory. The city just burned, and the weapons were left in the ash. And 3,000 years later, a young archaeologist from the Penn Museum pulled them out of the ground and realized he was looking at something that had changed history. A city that got there first and paid for it with everything they had. 7 weapons. One almost 8 feet long, forged by a civilization that should not have been able to make it. One carved from limestone to commemorate the man who created Egypt. One gripped in the hand of a giant who lived 3,800 years ago. One sealed in a wall for 400 years, influenced by weapons knowledge that crossed the entire Eurasian landmass. One buried alone with a warrior who needed nothing else to define himself. and one set of blades from a city that died before anyone else caught up to what it had invented. Every single one of them is telling you that the past was more capable, more sophisticated, more surprising than the textbooks suggest. And given that 160,000 Japanese burial mounds are still unopened, and untold sites in Azerbaijan and Iran and Egypt and Denmark have not yet been touched, the next object that makes experts say beyond what we had imagined is already in the ground, we are just waiting for the shovel to find it.